Pascale Helyar-Moray, OAM, is an award-winning entrepreneur who uses innovation as a means to solve big picture problems. She is the founder of Grow My Money, a world-first platform enabling users to turn their shopping into mortgage or superannuation savings. For her services to business and women's affairs, Pascale was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia in the Australia Day 2024 Honours List. What led you to get to this point where you decided to specialise in this?
I was working at BT Financial Group in my mid-20s, and I was in the marketing department, and I was literally writing the brochures on compound interest and learning about super, and then I took a strong interest personally in superannuation, and I started doing salary sacrifice, and that was something I continued through my 20s and 30s. And then when I relocated to London for work, then I was writing more documents and marketing material. And then when we returned to Australia, I started realizing actually what a sort of a specialized knowledge this is, and it shouldn't be specialized.
What normally happens, and then what did you do that was different?
So typically what happens is that, let's say there's Jane and John. They leave university having studied the same degree and they go into the workforce. So they're earning the same amount of money and therefore the same amount of super. Now, John will start earning a higher salary and therefore earning more super because he is more likely to, statistically, negotiate a higher salary than Jane. That's the first thing. So here's where we start to see the beginning of the divergence, right, between his and hers super balances.
What does it take to be a financially empowered woman? And what can financially empowered women do together to change the world? A shocking statistic is that around 400,000 women in Australia are at risk of homelessness. And the cause of this is the lack of education about how to build a financial foundation, starting even before we first enter the workforce and well into our retirement years. My name's Dion Payne, and I'm the founder of the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm passionate about ending homelessness, and as part of that passion, I chose to look at the systemic barriers that are causing homelessness for women in the first place. The Financially Empowered Women podcast is designed to bring you the best experts from around the world to increase your financial know-how and give you practical and women-specific tips to overcome the challenges you might be facing, such as how to negotiate a better salary, demystifying super, or how to navigate a separation and ensure the assets are distributed fairly. My role is to provide you with the best information out there to change your trajectory and become a financially empowered woman, because you deserve it, and the world needs you more than ever to own your worth and help others to do the same. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm your host, Dion Payne, and today I'm here with Pascale Helyar-Moray. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Pascale. With a focus on gender equality and superannuation, backed by extensive experience in the financial services, leadership and entrepreneurship, Pascale has founded and advised startups, taking a number of them through to exit. Prior to her startup life, Pascale held senior marketing roles at JP Morgan Asset Management, BT Financial Group and BNP Paribas. Passionate about gender equality, Pascale has served as Director of Communications for the Australian Gender Equality Council. She has just released her first book, Rich Woman, Poor Woman. Welcome, Pascale.
Thank you, Dion. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. So my first question, and it's a bit off the list, but what was it like to receive the Order of Australia? That's quite an achievement, and it's really glad to read this about you because it makes me really know, I knew before anyway, but it makes me really know that you're the person that is the absolute expert on this kind of thing. Well, how did you find out that you were nominated, and what was the actual event like?
Yeah, so I didn't know I was being nominated. And so where are we? It was October 2023. Yeah. And I received an email, which frankly I thought was spam. And saying you've been nominated, and I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, this is a pretty fancy scam. And I did a bit of Googling and research, and I thought, well, actually, maybe there's something to this. And so I kind of shut my eyes and I clicked on the link, thinking, oh God, making sure everything had been backed up first. And then I quickly realized this was far from a scam, and I had to click on, I actually had to accept the nomination, you see. And so that's why they asked you to click on the link and so on. They had to check that whoever had completed or, submitted you for nomination had all your details correct, and, was there anything else that you'd like to add into your nomination, etc. And at the time, I didn't know who'd done this. And it was a very, very comprehensive piece of due diligence on me. Like, there was a lot of the, obvious accomplishments, but there were quite a few of the very much less known, less visible accomplishments. And I was gobsmacked because whoever had completed this nomination had clearly spent a long, long time doing so. So I accepted the nomination, and then sat back and waited. And so it was some months later, in early January 2024, when I received another email, and this time I was, I'd marked a safe sender from this email address by now. And I had, the news saying that I had been, my nomination had been approved, and it would be announced in the 2024 Honours Day list. And so then I had to sit on it for 3 weeks or thereabouts. And that was a very hard and long 3 weeks. And we didn't even tell the children. Oh, my husband knew, but we didn't even tell the children until the night before, because the night before Australia Day, the list is published at, I think, 9 p.m. on the Governor-General's website. And we didn't even tell the kids because I was so worried that there would be some, random blurting to someone somewhere, and then I'd have a PR disaster on my hands. And so we only told them the night before. And it was my girls were really proud of me, but as I expected. But my son, who is usually more reticent, he just gave me the biggest hug, the absolute, like a headlock of a hug. And he turned around and said to my husband, "Gosh, Dada, you better step up your game now." And it was hilarious. So that was the nomination. Of course, then the next day was published in the newspaper. And then the actual ceremony was a few months later at Macquarie, at the Governor General's house in Macquarie Street in Sydney CBD. And that was nothing short of just a magic morning. You're seated there with other recipients of medals and so on, and some are from, Navy, Army, but there are other, civilians like me who, I don't know, maybe they've been, incredibly prolific in the arts world or community service or, other people in the business sphere, and everyone, like all the staff and so on, they are genuinely so happy for you, and you're congratulated at every single touch point. And then there's a lovely, champagne and canapes in the gardens thereafter. So it was such a special day. Oh,
well, congratulations. And for somebody to have nominated you and to really think so highly of you to go through that process, and then for you to have that recognition to all the work that you've been doing, I think that's fantastic and really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Pascale, you're an expert in superannuation. What led you to get to this point where you decided to specialise in this?
Do you know, that's a good question, because it was never really planned. I sort of fell into it by accident in the sense that I was working at BT Financial Group in my mid-20s, and I was in the marketing department, and I was literally writing the brochures on compound interest and learning about super. And then I took a really, I guess, a strong interest personally in superannuation, and I started doing salary sacrifice, and that was something I continued through my 20s and 30s. And then when I relocated to London for work, then I was writing more, documents and marketing material on, well, not super as it's called over there, but pensions, and becoming very familiar with self-invested personal pensions, SIPs, and so on. And so then when we returned to Australia, I think because I had that background and I had that personal, not only personal experience with salary sacrifice and combined with the work experience, but then I started realizing how, and because we're now talking sort of 15, 20 years, on, I started realizing actually what a sort of a specialized knowledge this is, and it shouldn't be specialized. I don't think it should be specialized, but I guess because it's so remote for most people, and it's so misunderstood and so complex, by default, it's become my specialty. And I think because then I came to work with the Australian Gender Equality Council, and that was one of our launch campaign platforms, is that at the time, which was 2018, the stats were such that women were retiring with 42% less super than men, which is like a huge number. And that thankfully that gap has closed now, so it's only 25%, but that really shocked me. And I think it was just the discrepancy between my own personal experience and then what it seemed like the rest of the country or the female population was experiencing, that I really started to become intrigued by this. And I really became, I really started to dig and unpack into why this was the case, and how do we arrive at this point. And the more I dug, the more, frankly, bizarre answers I uncovered. And what I mean by that is that for example, I found a submission to Treasury, so to the government, dated 2002, which highlighted that women were challenged, I think that was the phrase they used, by their work-life patterns when it comes to building super. And so here I was in 2018, 2019 at this point, going, hang on, so government's known about this for close on 20 years and has done zip? Like, this is absolutely nuts to me. Okay, they're not zip, but tweaking, nothing wholesale, nothing structural. And so that was quite a discovery to me. So working with my colleagues at the Gender Equality Council at the time, I was really trying to understand kind of where we sat as a country when it came to super and so on, relative to others. And so one of the stats that I unpacked was that, and looking at the ABS data, I was like, this is crazy. Like, if I'm understanding this correctly, 40% of women in that accumulation phase of their lives are not in the paid workforce. So women between, 15 and 64. And I sent this data off to my, the director, the CEO of the council, and he came back to me and said, yes, that's correct. And I said, well, and if that's the case, then you've got 40% of the female population of Australia of that age, which is roughly 7 million women, they're getting this information, right? And these this industry and government mandate that they should just top up their super. But if 40% aren't in the workforce, how do they do that? And it seemed to be this incredible, wicked problem. And he looked at the stats and the data and the calcs, and he said, no, you're right. And I said, well, this is just absolutely barking mad to me. Like where is the money tree in the back garden? Because frankly, if it exists, I'd like to find it too. And so I suppose it was just really a combination of my personal and professional experience combined with, a particular lens that I had on gender equality, and also a thirst for knowledge and a desire to dig and unpack and so on, that really helped surface the problems and the causes of the problems. And again, as I say, because so few people are interested in super, I suppose I kind of fell into it by default to become the superannuation literacy expert.
That's really cool. And it's actually quite disturbing that all of this information about the gender super gap and the reasons that women weren't accumulating super were known so long ago. And it only feels relatively recently that it's been more talked about and more in the general awareness.
Yes, absolutely. And even, at the time, sort of 2018, 2019 that I'm talking about, people had heard of the gender super gap. Well, most people. But very, very, very few had extrapolated to what that meant on your superannuation.
Well, I remember, so we, just for context for the audience, you and I met at an event recently where you presented and you were showing, you showed a graph, and it was really powerful, which was basically that yourself and your husband started off with about the same amount of super, but you're still pretty much at the same amount of super. I think you might even have a bit more, but that's not necessarily the story for many women. So what happens?
No. As in, why is my super still more than his?
Well, yes. So let's take it from what normally happens, and then what did you do that was different?
So typically what happens is that, let's say there's, I don't know, Jane and John, right? Two grads, they leave university having studied the same degree, and they go into the workforce. So they're earning the same amount of money. And therefore the same amount of super. Now, typically what happens is John will start earning a higher salary and therefore earning more super, because he is more likely to, statistically, negotiate a higher salary than Jane. So that's the first thing that happens. So here's where we start to see the beginning of the divergence, right, between his and hers super balances. Now, this, of course, is making a very big assumption that they are in the same industry and therefore earning the same amount of money, right? However, this is a big however, there are some industries where there is absolutely flat chat just not the case. So, for example, did you know that dental graduates, female dental graduates, straight out of the gate, out of university, they are earning 26% less than male dental graduates.
Pardon me? A female graduate is earning how much less?
In dentistry. 26%. I know. I don't know why. I gave an address at the University of Sydney graduation class a few years ago, and I had looked up the gender pay gap for graduates in business, and I was saying to the audience, in business, there's it was a smaller percentage, single digit percentage, and I was trying to teach them about particularly the women, particularly the importance of making sure you negotiate for that salary increase, and because it impacts your super, etc. And by contrast, I said, so, right now in finance, there's there was a gender pay gap, but that's not as bad as your colleagues in dentistry who have a 26% gender pay gap. bang, like right out of it. And I don't know why. I haven't had time to unpack why this is the case for dental graduates. Anywho, back to John and Jane. So he's now starting to earn a little bit more in terms of his salary compared to her, statistically speaking, and therefore his super contributions are higher. So on we progress throughout the 20s, late 20s, and so on. Now let's say that we're in their early 30s. So the gap between his and her super contributions has already started to diverge some more. Now she steps out of the workforce. And when she does, to have children, right? And she might have one child, she might have two, she might have three. But every time she does that, she is not being paid superannuation contributions. She's likely not being paid superannuation contributions by her company. She will now, thanks to the current government, she will be paid superannuation contributions for the first, I think it's 18 weeks of her parental leave. But this is a very, very, very recent piece of legislation.
Well, that's great to hear.
It is progress. This is actual, genuine progress. So, if we wind back the clock to just a few years ago, this wasn't happening. And so the fact that Jane is out of the workforce, she's not earning an income, and therefore she's not earning superannuation contributions, is another reason why hers and John's super balances are going to diverge even more dramatically. Now, if, and it's a big if Jane goes back to work, because remembering that 60% of the female population are in paid work, so there's a whacking great big 40%. She could be in that 40%, but let's say she's not. If she is in the 60%, now the other thing too, she's now back in the workforce, but she's now working part-time, because more women work part-time than they do full-time in order to accommodate family responsibilities and so on. So again, while she is now earning an income and earning super contributions, her super contributions are fractional compared to John's. And so this pattern, this is how we arrive at what historically used to be a 42% gender super gap, and more recently has closed to a 25% gender super gap.
And then when you throw in a divorce and separation, what happens then?
Oh, wow. Interestingly enough, I've come across someone recently who specializes in this, and I'm meeting her tomorrow, I think. And her claim is that women who've been through divorce have a 113% gender super gap. So typically, in a divorce, she gets the house, he gets the super. So then she's effectively has to start from scratch. Now there are current proposals from Women in Super and industry super funds and so on for reforms to make super splitting in these scenarios fairer, so that it's treated like, John and Jane's super together is treated as a whole pot and it's just split down the middle. Because in theory, while that should have happened historically, it has not. And that's also part of the reason and the rationale why the older woman, or that demographic of women over 55, is the fastest growing demographic of homeless people in Australia, because it's a double whammy for them. Number one, they didn't have enough time to accrue super while they were in the workforce and so on, before stepping out of the workforce to have kids, etc., etc. Typically, husband or partner said, "Oh, don't worry, darling, I'll look after you in retirement." And then there's some sort of marital breakdown in early 50s. She gets house, he gets super. And then she quickly realizes that she can't live off her bricks and mortar. And And so she finds herself with no super. And that's why we have the stat that we do, where 1 in 6 women in Australia retires into poverty, which is just frightening.
It really is. And I'm so grateful as to the way that you broke that down. I had sort of had this idea right at the beginning that, John and Jane entering the workforce would be fairly on a similar amount of income, and that it was the things that happened afterwards that created that gap. But to hear that in some professions, even right at the beginning, there's that gap is quite frightening. So it really does bring into that it does bring up the importance of being able to negotiate for what you're worth right at the beginning, and to be confident enough to ask for that in the first place, and to be confident enough to go somewhere else if you're not getting it, because when you look at future you, the consequences of that action right at the beginning can be quite dire.
Absolutely. And as women, we feel that, do we feel that we are, we've justified, asking for a promotion or raise or whatever it might be? Well, we probably are justified, but also, if you don't ask, you don't get. It's that simple. It really is that simple. And you're not just doing, as you say, current you a disservice, you're doing future you a disservice.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what it comes down to is nobody ever really thinks of the consequences later in life. Nobody ever really thinks that could happen to me until they're kind of well entrenched down that path. So it's really about having that awareness of, okay, well, this could happen. So how do I build myself right from the beginning to prevent that from happening in the first place? And the beauty of that, like thinking right from the beginning, is, well, you end up thriving financially anyway, because you're taking care of yes, you're taking care of the future, but you're also taking care of you now as well.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so from your experience and all the work that you've done, what would be 3 of the biggest tips that you could give to women to take control of their finances and take control of their super?
Gosh, well, at the risk of, and I know you've heard this before, Dion, so a couple of times, so forgive me for the repetition, but I'm going to give one headline blanket rule for women, and then I'll get into 3 specific tips, if that's okay. So when it comes to your super, women, all the women who are listening, and all the men who are listening too, I just have one rule, and I know and I understand how complex super can appear, and how it's this big, horrible, scary beast that none of us want to get, up close and personal with. And I understand that the industry and government has made it very, very challenging in the eyes of the consumer. But for all its complexity, the one rule I have for women when it comes to their super is just add as much as you can, as early as you can. And that's it. That is all that you need to know. Just add as much as you can, as early as you can. Add as much because the system is not set up for women. And so we need to, unfortunately, do more to compensate for that. Add as early as you can, because then you have hopefully decades of all your contributions compounding away and making the total sum even greater. Now, in terms of 3 specific tips, here's what I would say. Number 1, and this does assume that you are in the workforce, salary sacrifice. Just salary sacrifice. There is a fantastic website called paycalculator.com.au where you can play with, okay, what happens if I salary sacrifice $100 a week or $200 a week or whatever your number might be? Because here is the beauty of salary sacrifice. anything going into your superannuation is only taxed at 15%. Just 15%. Now, let's contrast that with, let's say you're a top earner and your marginal tax rate is 45%. That means that any investment in your super is already 30% ahead, being 45% less the 15% superannuation tax rate. So you're already 30% ahead. And that's even before we start thinking about what the actual, assets or investments have performed within your super bucket, right? So salary sacrifice is joyous because it enjoys this very, favorable and encouraging tax rate. But it also, and you will see this when you play around on your pay calculator exploration, it also reduces your taxable income. Yes. So you're doing two things. You're boosting wealth for future you, and you are reducing tax payable for you now. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is and this is obviously in the lines of just, along the lines of just add as much as you can, as early as you can, set up a direct debit from your bank account into your superannuation on payday. Now, again, I've used the word payday, and for most women, yes, that will mean that their income that they are paid from their salary. But payday might also be an allowance that you receive, or it might be a regular, it might be investment income. So the reason that I say to set up a direct debit from your bank account on payday, however we define that, is because that way it goes straight into your super, where guess what? It's enjoying that wonderful 15% tax rate. But it also means if you set up the direct debit that you as the owner of that bank, you can't interrupt the flow of funds. You can't intercept that $100 or $200 or whatever it might be and go, ooh, I think I'll go to lunch with my girlfriends, or ooh, I think I'll buy a new t-shirt. And this is the thing, like even me doing what I do and talking about, the importance of super and contributions, etc. Gosh, if I have a spare $100 in my bank account, I can tell you 10 different ways I'm going to spend it. But I will never think to actively process the thought of going, oh, you know what, I should contribute that to my super. Because the temptation of spending it on current me is too great. But if I have it set up as a DD and I can't interrupt that flow, then it just goes across into my super automatically. The third thing I would advocate, and again along the lines of just add as much as you can, as early as you can to your super, is using Grow My Money. So Grow My Money, as we know, Dion, but your listeners may not, is a shopping platform where every time you spend through the platform at 1,500 of Australia's leading retailers, you earn cash back into your superannuation. So let's say I spend $1,000 at Big W. I'll come to Grow My Money, it's free to join. I'll click on the Big W tile, shop at Big W as normal. Big W pays $20 into my Grow My Money account, and Grow My Money pays that $20 into your super fund. So you're doing the shopping anyway, and this is effectively free money, right? So I think you'd be silly not to take advantage of free money.
100%. So I loved what you shared there, and earn as much as you can, as early as you can. That's great advice. That's the advice I'm going to be giving to both of my children. I've got a boy and a girl. And then, sort of just talking about the salary sacrificing having the automatic direct debit and then working with Grow My Money, which I think is a fantastic idea, by the way. You're doing your shopping anyway, so you get cash back for that, which goes straight into your super or your mortgage, as you said, and can compound from there. I think that's 3 very practical and good ways to make a real difference and increase your super.
Great. Good. And if anyone ever, or any of the listeners are ever thinking, gosh, why would I want to build up my super? To this, I say the following. I have spoken and listened to and heard the stories of literally thousands of women when it comes to their super. And most of them, if I'm frank, are really terrifying stories, and they're tragic. And I don't want any listener or any reader or whoever it is, I don't want any woman to be retiring into poverty if they can avoid it. And as for why you would choose to build up your super rather than your existing share portfolio, whatever it may be, my response is always this. Because for all the stories that I've heard, I have never heard anyone say, I have too much super. Because having sufficient super it's not just about being rich from a wealth perspective. It's about being rich from a having freedom of choice perspective. Because personally, I cannot think of anything more grim than being retired, perhaps not able to earn any more money or have any more income, but having my choices dictated to through financial necessity.
Yeah, 100%. And, just on that, I read something yesterday, and it was just a quick scan read. I didn't go into the article in detail, but I saw something saying that they're thinking of increasing the retirement age to 80 rather than whatever it is now, which is,
Ooh,
I know.
67.
Yes.
67. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, there is the fact that we are living longer, and I know people in their 80s that are...
Much longer, though.
Not that much longer, but I know people in their 80s that are still fairly youthful in a sense. But no, by the time I'm 80, I want to be absolutely enjoying my life and only choosing to work if I want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully endorse that. I think that... it's important to keep your brain active when you're retired. Otherwise, I think it's the beginning of a long, slow decline. But 80 is a really ballsy move in terms of retirement age, because the average age for a woman's life in Australia is 88. And the average lifespan for an Australian man is only 85. Yeah. So and I don't know when obviously this article is proposing that we push the retirement age to 80, but I'm sure, male or female, I'm sure, God, we'd only that's only 5 or 8 years left of non-work life, right? Before. And so that's really, really quite frightening. I hope it doesn't come off, but it may have to, because potentially so many people are underfunded, right? But gosh, that's a whole wave of consequences and impacts that I really need to sit and think through.
Yeah. Well, I'm dedicated, and the Financially Empowered Women podcast is dedicated to sharing these stories and sharing these experts' advice to help as many people as possible avoid that type of scenario. So I will definitely be sharing the word about the work that you're doing. I think that what you're doing with Grow My Money is fantastic. I also know that you have a book, Rich Woman, Poor Woman. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, funny story actually. Off the back of my OAM last year, my someone reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "Oh, I love what you're doing in the space, blah, blah, blah. Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "Have I what?" Because I have so many stories to tell. And so that was it, really. And I wrote the book, and I called it Rich Woman, Poor Woman, because decades ago I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, right? Because I wanted to understand kind of the principles of wealth, and it was a world famous book. And I thought, isn't it interesting that no one has written the equivalent for women in the intervening decades? And we're seeing more and more women become more, earning more, becoming wealthier, and really, we're seeing more high-profile women, more leaders, more CEOs, and so on. I thought this is really interesting, and particularly with the intergenerational wealth transfer that we're, starting to see happen. More and more women will become more wealthy as a result of that. But, no one has written a topic, speaking to them, right? And so that was the inspiration for the book's title. But as to what its content is, it's really, a longer version of everything that we've just spoken about, Dion. It's, how the super system is not set up for women and why. And here are the things that you can do as a woman to mitigate that, and to avoid becoming one of the statistics of 1 in 6 women who retires into poverty. So it's about, it pulls together all my decades of financial services experience, all my superannuation focus, all my gender equality focus. And it's because I'm at a very interesting juncture where I, through my work, my career, I've interacted with government and the super funds and financial advisors, wealth planners, but I've heard those thousands of stories from women. I'm uniquely placed to have, be able to have spoken to all stakeholders within the industry. And so I've synthesized that information effectively in the book, and it's a series of case studies and insights and stories and metaphors and whatever to help you get rich slowly through building wealth and into your superannuation.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And I will have a link in the show notes for anybody that would like to get a copy of that book. Pascale, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a challenging conversation, a challenging topic in a way, but also quite hopeful, because there's absolutely things that we can do to change the trajectory for anybody that's feeling, okay, I just don't have my super in order. It's not too late, and there's definitely ways that that those challenging effects can be mitigated. So thank you so much for sharing.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Dion.
Pleasure.